Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Marion, the Senior Field Partner Manager at Rapid SOS. Thank you for tuning in with us on day 2 of Rapid SOS Ready23. We are truly grateful that you have joined us for a day dedicated to excellence from our public safety community from across the country. We do want to encourage you to actively engage on our Ready23 virtual event platform, UVA, participate and engage with other attendees through question and answer, polls, and other areas to communicate. Today, we're joined by a panel of amazing women leaders in 911 to discuss their experience, their journey, and lessons learned. I'm also privileged to call and consider each of them a friend, and I've learned much from all of them already, but I look forward to this discussion. We have Tippy Brookins, Chief of Professional Standards and Development from the District of Columbia, Office of Unified Communications. Ann Camaro, Executive Director of Neshoba Valley Regional Emergency Communications Center, and Keely Heyman, Executive Director of Mountain Valley ECC. So I'm going to take a minute, let our panelists introduce themselves and share briefly why they've chose to join me on this discussion and topic of leadership, specifically women in leadership and public safety. So Tippy, you're in my upper left-hand corner. I'm going to start with you.
Thank you so much, Amy. Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. As she said, my name is Tippy Brookins. I am a native from a very small town of Clayton in New Jersey, in South Jersey. I'm super excited to be a part of this panel. I have about 21 years of experience in public safety. I started way back when, back with Amtrak Police in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. There, I received a lot of different training where I had the experience to become a call taker and a dispatcher. Then I moved on because I wanted to definitely do more in public safety. And I worked at a very large county dispatch in Pennsylvania, Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, where I was offered many opportunities within that agency as a communications training officer, as a police dispatcher, as a supervisor, worked in QA, worked in training, but it didn't stop there. And, we'll go into it as far as being burnt out and what that looks like. But eventually I took a break, but then I came back and I ended up here in Washington, D.C., working for a really, really great agency within the nation's capital. Here I am responsible for a division that handles all of the training here for this agency, for the Office of Unified Communications, also quality assurance, and also our transcription unit as well. And, I'm just a part of this great agency where we're able to develop the future leaders of tomorrow, and I'm super excited.
Thank you so much. Ann, I'm going to go to you next.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's always really hard to describe myself. I hate it. I'm always like, I don't know what to say. But here we go. I've been in the 911 field for about 17 years. I always say I started when I was 10, so we'll always stay that way. And I started out as a call taker, police dispatcher in like a mid-sized police department. And, in that police department, I held the position of CTO, union steward, supervisor, and union steward. I left there in 2014 to put together a civilian dispatch center in a small town. I went from about 98,000 calls a year to, 1,900. So that was quite a change. And then a couple of years later, I went to the city of Cambridge as the assistant director of administration and training. I was there for 5.5 years. And in 2021, I came to Neshoba Valley as the director. So, I've worked in 4 different PSAPs, very, very different from size to how we did things. And I've been involved in, our local, regional, and national associations. I do have a passion for our field. I do have a passion for 911 and, for the people who do this. So that's me.
She does have a passion for this field, and we're going to talk a little bit about that through the discussion. So Keely, I'll hand it over to you for a minute.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon, and I guess good morning to the other side of the coast. Is that correct? I am Keely Heyman. I am the executive director here in central New Jersey. So I'm glad to see that New Jersey is represented here today quite strongly. Thanks, Tippy. I started my career as a baby EMT straight out of high school. I had no idea what I wanted to be when I grew up, so I joined my local rescue squad, and I started. I'm not going to give you the year because then you'll be able to do the math. And I'm like Ann. I started when I was 10, so I Started as an EMT. A few years into it, I was off in paramedic school and trying to just find my footing. I really liked public safety, loved it, loved everything that it had to offer. Just wasn't sure what I wanted to be when I grew up, and then had a little situation happen in the field and ended up with an application kind of being tossed at me, and I was told to apply if I thought I could do better things. So I applied to be a dispatcher early in the career, before 2000 was a thing. So I started quite early. During that time, I also went off to earn my associate's degree in emergency management. So I sat on our local and county Office of Emergency Management boards in logistics and planning, mostly on the EMS division for the county side. And then I made my way into Rutgers University, where I was an EMT there and worked very strongly with the training division there, and as also worked with their team of people who were constantly in charge of the EOC for major events. And Rutgers is a very big university here, so we did a lot of big, very large scale events. And then about 2017, I decided I wanted to try a bigger center with more opportunity and growth. I was kind of stuck where I was, and especially as a woman in my field. So I decided to move up into a regional center, which is kind of unheard of in New Jersey and the Northeast. So I decided to come to Mountain Valley, where there would be some growth and some opportunity. And in 2019, I was promoted to deputy director, and very quickly made my way up to executive director here in late 2021. And that's where I've been. And I'm here today because I do have a passion for this. I believe very wholeheartedly in what we do here as management, as administrators, as leaders in the industry, and especially as women who had a hard time getting here, I think, for many of us. So that's why I'm here with Amy today.
So, wow, just like those last few minutes of everybody describing kind of their experience, very high level, and where you've come from, like, we need more than 45 minutes for this conversation. I'm sure there's a lot of experience, a lot of lessons learned that we could all bring together. But I am really excited about this conversation. As a female myself in 911, I too started as a 10-year-old dispatcher 25 years ago, and have seen firsthand the amazing contributions that so many women make on a daily basis to further the mission of not just 911, but public safety as a whole. I see the way we contribute both, now throughout our career, many of those women in leadership positions, some leading without a leadership title. Women are mentoring and helping others come along beside them and behind them to help them be kind of that next and that future leader in 911. But at the same time, I've seen some of those same women who are, wonderful pioneers and leaders in the 911 space, but they're struggling kind of for their voice to be heard or having the visibility that they deserve or that seat at the table, so to speak. So sometimes I think missing, and we've kind of alluded to it maybe a little bit, but is that equal respect that sometimes we see or feel is given to our male peers. I think all of us have experienced it here at some point, and it's a common theme through social media, conversations we see, post groups, conference discussions, even sessions that are out there. So with that said, let's kind of have a discussion on some of what this shared experience has been, but those positive outcomes we've seen from some of those challenges, and hear how each of you have learned through that and overcome that, and how you're helping the next generation of 911 leaders. Want to hear kind of what you would say to them, how they can approach those challenges, and how they can continue to grow in the public safety space. So Tippy, you kind of already shared, how long you've been in 911, but when exactly, was there like a defining moment when you realized you were passionate about this industry and you kind of wanted to grow your career and continue contributing and being that leader for the next generation?
Yes, so probably I would say about 10 years in, being a supervisor of a somewhat, not a small center, I guess at any given time, we had about 35 people on duty any given shift. And I experienced it in the line of duty death while supervising. And it was very different for me. I had never been through anything like that. And however, the agency that I worked for, training was a big deal for the supervisors, for managers, for the call takers and dispatchers. So for that line of duty death incident that I experienced, we were well prepared. However, I doubted myself. That incident made me think, was there anything else that I could do to change that situation? And I left work on that day and I stayed home, and my coworkers, they called, they're like, are you coming back? And so finally, after probably about a week and a half, I had the courage to turn around and go back to work. But I will tell you that probably about 3 months after that, I experienced another line of duty death while supervising. And I said, this was it. I had to go. I called myself burnt out at that time. I left and I went to another agency, a government agency, where I ran a program and, I contributed to change. But then I think at that moment, and when I had took on a position with the Metropolitan Police Department, I realized that I think I found why and what I needed to do, and that was to return to 911. I saw the effect that I had on people and the change, how I affected change. And so coming here to DC and getting that knowledge as far as the police department and understanding how different things work here in DC, I had to get back to 911. And I knew at that point that training was where I needed to be. Development is where I needed to be in order to help someone who went through the same experience as me. Because if it was not for those 2 incidents that I incurred when I was in Pennsylvania, I don't think I would be right here in this seat. I've always had a desire and a passion for training, but I never knew what my purpose was. And those things made me really realize the purpose, why I'm here at the OUC, and why I am in the position of Chief of Professional Standards and Development, because now I have the opportunity to develop that next chief, to develop that next manager or training specialist. So.
Just kind of a side note, I was privileged to meet Tippy in her early days at OUC as that training lead there, and really watch and see her interact with the trainees coming in and the training sessions, and just how she was kind of leading that next generation. So kind of had admired her from afar from the time we had that first encounter and experience, but I know she's doing really great things there. Anne, Keely, either of you, any kind of defining moment or anything that kind of happened in your career that you can say, this is when I knew that this was my profession, this is, what I wanted to do and what my passion was?
I can speak to one circumstance that happened to me, and it was really more negative than it was positive, but it ended up being positive years later. It kind of stems around Hurricane Katrina, and I was involved, and I was still working in the field. I was dispatching. Again, don't do the math on that. So I really knew there was a need for emergency management and it to be sort of umbrellaed differently than it was being handled. And I decided to go back to school. And I went back. The program that I got into is a local program where you need field experience, and you need to have people basically write letters saying that this person has been working with emergency management. This person has been, you need all the work experience to be even accepted into this associate's degree program. And I decided I was going to do it. I had my coordinator who wrote me all sorts of letters. And, 2.5 years later, I graduated with my associate's degree. And in a very embarrassing display of events that happens, I am very excited. I'm the first person in my small little family, aside from my cousin, who got their college degree. And I was really happy that I had done this. And then I was basically told I had a Mickey Mouse degree, and it was ridiculous. I was a dispatcher. What did I need that for? And it was that pivotal moment that was like, why aren't we educating our dispatchers and allowing them growth in this space? And they were like, you're never going to need to know that. You're never going to need to have something more than what you are, because you're just a dispatcher. And that to me was that defining moment. And that was, I don't know, lots of years into my career at that point. And it was just a huge defeating moment to me, because I realized that there is still this vein of people who think that we're not worth more than just answering phones and pushing buttons, and that there's no value in further education if this is what you're going to be when you grow up. So I certainly had that moment for me was, I want to make this better, and I want to make this better for the people that are coming behind me and the people that do stay in it, the people that are sticking around for years, because that's where you get your institutional awareness. That's where you get your experience. There are things that happen in a center that a dispatcher who comes in for 2 to 3 years, which is, you know, your typical tournaments. I think it's now up to like 5 or 7 now, which is great. But when I started, it wasn't. We all used it as a stepping stone and went on to become law enforcement or firefighters. And while that's changing now, I think it's only changing because of the voices that are standing at the top of the mountain now saying this can be a career, this can be an option. So I really think that that was my moment. That was my change. I knew that I had to reach back and help.
Yeah, I think just piggybacking a little bit off of what Keely said, for me, it was kind of the same thing. I started at the police department call taking and dispatching because I wanted to be a police officer. I wanted to be on the road. I wanted to do all of the things I saw on CSI, right? And then after about 2 years, one of the lieutenants came down, asked me if I was going to take the civil service exam, and I said no. And he was like, why? And I said, well, I don't think I want to do that anymore. We used to help with bookings, and I had to be back there and helping the officers with searching females and all that stuff. I was just like, I don't think I can do this. I also do enjoy my air-conditioned space. So I don't like to be hot. I don't like to be cold. I don't like to be rained on. So I think that had a lot to do with it. But I think one of the biggest things was I had started creating change within that department, right? When I first started, we didn't have a training program. I pretty much went to a state academy. I sat in a classroom with all different people from all over the state for 5 weeks. And when I got back, the chief, at the time, not the chief, the captain said, here's your phone, here's your radio, have fun. I had no idea what I was doing. The girl that was training me, I started in May. She had started in February. So she went to the academy with me. So she was training me and we had officers in the room. It was so chaotic. And I remember just being like, this cannot continue. And, you know, from then on, it was like, okay, well, can we create a good training program that we can put somebody through and that they're not going to be thrown to the wolves? And then it was like, well, chief, I don't really like our pants. Can we get new pants? And he was like, what is wrong with you? Why are you coming to me with this? And I'm like, well, who do I go to? Like, I just want to do this. And I think the final thing was, I was pregnant and I was the union steward at that point. And the deputy had made some decisions that I did not agree with as, you know, the union steward. And I said, this is not okay. I went up to his office, had a conversation. He said to me, oh, Ann, just give me a pass. And I literally walked out of his office and walked into the chief's office and had a conversation. And the chief literally looked at me and he said, you are the first person who's ever challenged anything from the dispatch center, and I see something in you. And when that was said to me, it just put in motion all of these things that I was like, you know what, I am capable of doing more. I am capable of pushing for more. And that's when it really kind of, that little fire started inside of my head, and it was just like, we're gonna make this a better profession.
I really love that. And I think there's, a key takeaway for everybody listening on that, male or female, whatever your years in this industry, and whether you're 6 months in, 6 years in, 16 years in, and you feel like, well, my job is to answer a phone and dispatch the radio. There is something, and, Anne, you kind of described it as that training need, and you found an area that needed to be improved, an area you could contribute, an area you either were or became passionate about. And everybody has that opportunity to identify something that they can make their space a little bit better and be a leader. You don't have to have a title to lead. And so find something wherever you're at to contribute and where you can fill a gap and help, whether it's your supervisor or your director, or take something on that can help make your agency better, and in the process make you a little bit of a better leader as well. So, one of the things, Anne, that you're doing, you are very active and visible, especially in the state of Massachusetts and even across, the country at different conferences. But you support and encourage women in 911 to kind of take action, grow professionally, and even creating opportunities for them to have that, first time opportunity to speak or things like that, and really help them be confident female leaders. I know you started a state 911 Women in 911 group. Can you share kind of what prompted you to to initiate that?
Boredom? No, I'm just kidding. So I am somebody who has to be going at, 100 miles an hour all the time. I have to be busy and I have to have things to do. It was right after COVID restrictions had just started lifting. I found out about the Women in 911 group from Nina, and I was like, this is interesting. And I said, well, Massachusetts is kind of weird because we have our local chapter of Nina, we have our local chapter of APCO, we also have a local association within the state of Mass, MCSA, and I had been involved in one way or another in all those associations, but there was nothing really for women, right? Like everything is like, everybody's together, let's just do it all together. And I just really find that a lot of times women are intimidated by their male peers. I think, in the state of Massachusetts, there are several different PSAPs, probably only a handful that are led by women. And whenever I went to conferences and I went to, it was always a very small percentage of women who were doing presentations, who were doing sessions. And I just thought that we could do better, right? Like that's always like the force behind it. It's like, oh, how can we do better? So I had a conversation with Chandri down at National Win, and I said, hey, how about we do a Massachusetts chapter, and that way I can, do local events that people can actually go to, because what happens is in Massachusetts especially, we don't get to go to national conferences. Very, very rarely these chiefs are putting in their budget to have dispatchers go to conference. So it was more out of, hey, we're lifting up restrictions on COVID right now. We're going to start virtual and let's see how it goes. And last year was our first like full day like training summit, and Amy came and spoke, and it's really like an opportunity for people to network and grow their leadership skills and really be at the forefront of technology, as well as, their other soft skills, I would say.
And I'll just, say, unfortunately, due to travel, I had to leave that event early, but the half of the day that I was there, like, for any event, it was a great event, but especially the fact that it was that first time event, like it was phenomenal. Just the amount of people there, the engagement, the energy, the speakers, the sessions. It was a great job. Now, Keely, I know you're kind of in a similar situation to what Anne described. You're in a minority in the leadership field as a female in New Jersey. You want to share a little bit more about that?
So I think to me it was more alarming. I had a colleague call me one day and he basically was like, there's like one of you in the state, right? And as time went on, I recently learned there's a couple more of us, not a lot, of females that are holding positions of rank or title, if you'd like to go down that rabbit hole, positions of leadership, if you will, that are recognized. Because I do believe there's a lot of women leaders out there that are just not recognized as they should be. And we're a very rank-driven state. So if you're not a police chief, a fire chief, or somebody who has a badge and a gun, they're likely not going to be listening to you at a table unless you've told them that you have some sort of retired background in any of those environments. For the longest time, especially in New Jersey, Nina was probably our go-to. That was the source. So that was only heard of if the police departments that were the PSAPs allowed their dispatchers to go. And I was very lucky many years ago that I had a captain who was like, you know what? You seem to be interested in this, and it'll probably keep you quiet. So why don't you go down to this conference and go check it out? And I remember getting there, and this is many years ago. Again, we're not doing math. Many, many years ago, and I got to go down there. And the amount of women to male ratio was completely just off. It was a bit alarming to me, and I remember feeling like, do I belong in these classrooms? And I remember years later thinking, what a weird thought to have. Like, of course I belong at these classes and in these sessions and in these conferences, but what a weird thought to have, because somebody has basically embedded some seed in my brain somewhere that makes me think that I'm not supposed to be at these tables because I don't have a background in law enforcement, because I wasn't promoted through rank and title that I wasn't a male in the space, because if I wasn't one of the two other options, then I should be a male in order to have a voice. And I really felt hindered by that concept for years. And I really can't quite describe just how life altering it was to realize, like, oh, I'm allowed to speak. Like I'm allowed to do those things. But I think many of us, and especially women, have grown up in this environment, which we will all admit, public safety is a male dominated field. There's nothing wrong with that, because that's just, for years, that was the requirements, that there were certain standards that need to be met. And public safety, I mean, I should say more specifically dispatch, was sort of the anomaly, where when women were more welcomed into that environment because it was a administrative title, so it was okay to be there. But I feel like, knowing that there's not that many of us who are speaking at any of these conferences or sitting at any of the tables that are making any of the decisions at the state level, was alarming. And when he told me that, I was like, what do you mean? Isn't there's got to be somebody else out there that looks like me that can do this, right? And I realized that maybe there just isn't enough of our voice being heard in the state. And so every chance I get to sit on a panel or show them that, like, hey, I'm from New Jersey and I'm a female and I'm here, and we have those voices and we have that ability and we have the knowledge. Like, there's no reason to say, because I'm a dispatcher, I don't know about phone networks, or I don't know about phone systems or 911 systems, or how that all is connected, or I don't have the ability to be further educated. It was really just, if you will, damning to women in our area to know that there's, like, this whole entire state, we've got almost 300 PSAPs in this state. Where are all the women in leadership? Like, where is all that? Where is it? So I think now that, the last conference I was at was last year, and that looked a lot better than years before that. So it's getting there, and I feel that maybe I need to take a page out of Anne's book and start a win here in New Jersey, because I do belong to the NITO one, but perhaps maybe I should pull that down here and we could do a little something together that might help.
Well, you have a mentor on this call who I'm sure can help you do that. And Keely does know her technology. Her and I have a lot of late night fun technology conversations at times about, what's working and sometimes what's not. But Tippy, you're in DC, which of course is not, a statewide with a bunch of different leaders, but I've had the opportunity to engage with, the District of Columbia and be there and, kind of support some of the things that you guys are doing there. One thing that stood out for me is that DC Office of Unified Communications has a great number of female leaders in those upper ranks. So can you kind of describe what that environment is and how you ended up there and what that's like?
Yes, so we are led now by our director, Ms. Heather McGathin, and then our deputy director is a female, Ms. Kelly Brown, and it's very different because, like you all said, this has always been a male dominant field, and so we do have males that are in other executive positions, but most of our executive positions are going to be filled with women. And it is great, when you're sitting at the table and you're able to hear the things that our leaders are speaking of, and just hearing the knowledge that they have and that they bring to the table. It's so refreshing, right? One thing I mentioned to Amy early on, for me, again, being in a male dominant field, when it came to fire dispatching early on in my career, that was something that was never heard of for a female where I came from, right? It was always a fire board of men. You weren't allowed to, you didn't dispatch fire trucks. That's something that women didn't do. If you saw one, there was maybe one or two, but for the most part, it was always men. And it was kind of like, okay, this is the norm. But then as I, went along and just saw things and went different places, and now I'm here in DC, and I'm just like, we have female fire dispatchers, female supervisors, watch commanders, assistant watch commanders. We have a newly promoted operations manager. It feels really, really great to be amongst those that are strong, those that have the courage and are not afraid to push the envelope, right? I have a coach, from one of the agencies that I've worked for, and I took her on as a coach. And she tells me to this day, she says, you know, I'm proud of you because you are not afraid to push the envelope. And I do it in a nice way. You know, there's a way that you go about it, right? Like Ann said, you know, you try to stay busy, but you want to do things, and you want people to know that you're there, just like you said, Keely, right? But there's a way that you go about it. There's a way that you deliver it. And I see those examples every day from my deputy director and from my director and how they deliver those messages, right? But while I am watching them, they are developing me to even be more encouraged to continue going on. So, you know, just seeing how they do things, it just really is so refreshing here in DC.
Awesome. You know, I saw all of you nodding about the fire dispatching being male dominated, which I was very shocked when Tippy said that. I came from a 911 center where when I started, we did have a male director who, you know, has been instrumental throughout my entire career. But aside from that, we had one male dispatcher. Everybody else was female. So the thought of like only a male dispatcher dispatching fire was like foreign to me. But apparently in the Northeast, from the head nods, it looks like that was maybe pretty common. So we certainly have come a long way from then. One of the things you said earlier, Keely, is kind of, you know, in public safety, we have a lot of male public safety responders. And of course, I think the female numbers in those ranks are growing, but in the 911 space, it's traditionally been, you know, a higher number of females, but that leadership part has not. And that kind of goes to one of the questions I saw in the chat earlier is, you know, how come there are more women in dispatch? And, you know, the male counterparts sometimes seem to have that leadership position is kind of how I'm interpreting that a little bit. What do you see as, Keely, you said about the, you know, chiefs coming in and kind of taking those ranks in New Jersey, but it's a little bit different, I feel like, in some other states. What are some of the challenges that you guys see of women increasing into that leadership position, and how can we help those who are coming up as dispatchers to recognize that they have an opportunity for those spots? What can they identify in themselves, in their opportunities they have to say, hey, I can get there, I can be that leader, and it doesn't have to be, you know, limited to the males in my organization that are going to get those spots. And I'm going to start with you because you kind of alluded to that too when you were talking about Massachusetts. Well,
I think one of the biggest things is we tend to gravitate towards the administrative work, right? And we're like, when I started, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to do training and public education. And these are all things that are administrative, and they're more educational than technical, right? But as you grow and as you know, start to think, hey, no, I need to be higher up to make more change, you have to bridge that gap of the technology. And I think that is one, you know, even though like schools today have so many STEM programs and all that, women are still a little bit behind on the technology and wanting to be part of the technology. I think the three of us, between Tippy, Keely, and myself, I think we have studied enough to know our technology back and forth, and then, you know, understand it. But there's still there's still a gap there between, you know, what are determined to be women's roles in the dispatch center versus the male roles in the dispatch center. You know, senior technology, you know, manager of technology, even going back to my previous job, most of our IT department were all males. So, you know, they were in charge of IT for the public safety. But why weren't there more women in those roles? I think it's systemic. I think, you know, if you walk into Google, you're going to find the same thing. If you walk into, you know, Facebook, you're going to find the same thing. But if you want to grow as a female in this field, you have to have both sides of it. You have to have the administrative, and you also have to have the technological. And I think that's what opened the door for me, was that I was very interested in how things worked. I was very interested in finding out, you know, how does the 911 system work in Mass? How does, you know, because it is a statewide system, it's managed by state 911. So very different from other parts in the country where it's owned by the agency. So I would have those conversations with my state 911 reps, and they would be like, why are you asking this? Like, it doesn't matter. You're not going to do. And I'm like, because I want to understand. And I think that's how I started kind of inserting myself into these roles of like, hey, I can change the toner on the printer, but I can also understand that this network cable, if plugged into here and into here, will make this work. So, you know, women, don't be afraid of technology, and don't be afraid of learning more about that technology. One other area that I feel we were not equally represented is the radio field, right? Radios are so important for our field. And if you don't understand how a radio works, you're going to run into issues. You're going to walk into a meeting with, you know, I have 13 chiefs that are part of my operations boards. They're all male. I can tell you right now, I know more about radios than any of them. And it's those things that take you that step above your chiefs, that you can talk the talk, but you can also walk the talk.
Keely, anything you would add to kind of what are those barriers and what can we do as women to get to that next step?
So one thing I would like to start with is teach your daughters that it's okay to take those classes that break those barriers. I was very fortunate. I'm going to give a little shout out to my dad. My mom was trying to teach me sewing and home economics, and my dad was like, no, you do shop classes so you can change your oil. So I was definitely brought up in the vein of I could ride both categories. I didn't need to sit firmly in the home economics classes. I could sit in the shop classes, and it was an okay place for me to be. So I was the only female in shop classes starting in middle school all the way through my high school career. And that made me a little less scared to come into an environment that was being dominated by men at the helm, but still being able to be like, excuse me, I have a question. And to not be afraid to ask those questions, because I feel a lot of times we're so afraid of being, and again, this is like social media, and this is just sort of the world we live in, where, you know, women are supposed to be quiet in the corner and look pretty and don't ask the questions. And it's like, you're afraid to sound stupid because maybe you don't know the answer, but the only way you're going to get the answer is to ask the question. And maybe it's the obvious question, and that's okay too, but you have to be willing to take that step forward for yourself, to educate yourself, to be like, okay, I don't know that data cable works that copy machine, and so tell me how it works. And don't think that you're any less of your male counterparts because you've asked the question. Because I learned something in a class a long time ago that I took that was like, the chances of them knowing are probably even less than you knowing. They just have a bigger presence and a louder presence, and you're supposed to be this little figure, a little mouse in the back of the room that doesn't speak. And that's where we get a little bit lost in the positions that we hold, because as Anne said, we tend to gravitate towards the administrative roles because they're just sort of the category that the vein we want to stay in. But you know, there's this whole technological side of our field, and if you bridge that gap a little bit and you start understanding the processes, it puts you at those tables, it puts you at the leadership roles, it allows people to have confidence in what you're speaking about, and not that you're just faking it till you break it. But also it's that, you know, there's this other piece, and it was a very dear friend of mine, and he's a colleague, but he's a dear friend of mine. And a few years ago, the position here for director was open, and I wasn't ready. I kept saying, I'm not ready. I'm not going to do it. I'm not ready. And I wish I had the quote on me right now, but basically it said something like, men will apply to a job if they meet 70% of the qualifications. Women won't apply to that same job unless they meet 100% of the qualifications. And that was something that, and he is a male in law enforcement. You know, he's way up there in rank, and he was like, this is why you guys aren't getting to the tables where we are, because we are bold enough and brave enough and ballsy enough to throw our hat in the ring, even if we only meet 70% of the qualifications. You guys wait, and you're like, oh, well, I don't have that, and I don't have that, and I'm not sure about that, and I don't know if I have enough training on that. He's like, you'll get that training. You'll get that training as long as you ask the questions while you're sitting in the seat. And that was a pivotal moment for me, because it was like, oh, I didn't realize that this is why we're our own worst enemies. we aren't putting our hat in the ring because we were told we had to qualify for everything and we had to make sense of it all right out of the gate. And we're bred that way. Like we're told that from a little girl, like, shh, don't talk and don't get involved unless you really know what you're doing. And a lot of times our male counterparts have no idea what they're doing either, but they're doing it because they were brave enough to get there. So again, teach your daughters that this is okay and that you can ride both ends of the category and ask the question and put your hat in the ring, even if you're 70% qualified. Just do it.
Tippy, how about you? Any advice that you would give those listening on how to get through those barriers?
So the one thing is that you guys touched on the educational piece and the experience, but I'm just going to take it to in another direction because, you know, it's very important to me. Number one, lead by example. You have to lead by example because guess what? You never know who's paying attention and who's watching at all times. In your conversations as a leader, when you're in certain groups, when you're in certain places amongst your team, if you're on the floor, if you're out at the supermarket, you have to be mindful of those conversations and how you're being a leader outside of your work environment and just being an example. Practice what you teach. You know, to lead is one thing and to manage is another, and they are totally two different things. You can be on an executive team, you can manage, but it's another thing to lead. And if you are not leading wholeheartedly, it's not going to make a difference, right? You know, if you're signing up for this just for a title, you know, I would say this isn't for you. But if you're doing this because you have a passion to lead, you have a passion to share your knowledge and to give to someone else, that is a piece of us helping to break down that barrier. That's one thing for me. The education, the knowledge, just the experience as far as people experience, that has gotten me to where I'm at. I mean, you know, I never knew that people were paying attention to me because I am wholeheartedly, I am genuine. And like I said, I practice what I preach, and it's not just 50% of the time. It's at home, at work, and that's what it's all about. So
You guys all hit on some really great points and things that I'm passionate about too, kind of that, you know, Tippy just now, you know, being genuine, being authentic. And I think just being the leader that you wish you had, and maybe you do have a great leader, but you know, if you do or if you don't, be the leader that you wish you had. And Keely and Anne both touched on the technology side. When I was in the dispatching seat, I did ask questions, but I never got deep enough answers to truly understand. I could maybe, you know, it was like scratching the surface. But when I got into, you know, kind of my second half of my 911 side career and started listening and learning the radio systems and the technology side, it was for men. I was surrounded by men leaders who'd been in the industry for 30 plus years. And I hated it because it was boring, but then I became to love it. And I now love the technology nerdy side of, so get uncomfortable, I think is my point. Surround yourself with people who do know something you don't. Ask questions and get in an uncomfortable space to learn something that you otherwise wouldn't. We've had a couple minutes left. I do have one question I want to kind of just quickly go round table. Some of the biggest challenges you faced in leadership and balancing professional and personal life in a demanding field, you know, with shift work, with multiple shifts throughout the day and throughout the week. I know, Keely, we talk about this, so I'll start with you for that one.
So I was so glad you got to this question because I can see it up here, and there's another question there I hope we get to. But for me, I think this is what women in leadership bring to the table that perhaps men don't. And that is the perspective that being a professional in public safety as a female and the demands on family, child rearing, all those things that you have to do that are kind of dual roles, where there's already a demand. And we know this, COVID taught us this, that women left the workforce because they were mostly responsible for the child care of the household. So what I did here in my center was during that time, it was, if you are having trouble with childcare, bring your child here and we will figure it out. And my deputy and I made it a point that that should not be something that should send you to tears, that you are afraid that you're going to lose your job or can't come to work because during this time things were closed. That certainly put a spotlight on how difficult it is to be a professional woman, to be a boss lady on top of that, and be a leader in the same all at the same time, and to work these crazy 24/7 shifts. But one thing I never did was I never shielded my son from what I did. He's basically grown up in the dispatch center. He is very acutely aware of how the world works and how 911 works and how the systems operate. He's been a part of it. He's watched me do things. He sits in my office during the summer. But I think with women at the helm, women having those voices and being able to show you that this is a difficult job, and there is a life, family life, work balance that you have to have, that brings that to that table. And while yes, it's still demanding, and I'm sure all the women in this room can absolutely attest to the fact that it's not easy. You do it, and we show you how to do it. And that's the leadership that you get from us. Is it's not easy, and we're going to figure out how to work around the schedule, and we're going to help you with childcare, and we're going to figure this out, and we're going to think outside of the box, and we're going to find ways to make it work for you.
We could have a whole nother conversation on this topic and the other question that
We have another
unfortunately
Ready23?
we're not going to get to. But we are at time, and so we have sessions coming up right after this. But I do want to thank each and every one of you for being a part of this conversation, being part of our Rapid SOS Ready23 family. If anybody has questions or want to connect with any of these ladies, please reach out to me on LinkedIn or via email at amarian@rapidsos.com. We have a few more engaging sessions lined up today. Explore them, engage on the application, and thank you guys so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having me.